everyone, it's me again. Welcome to my channel. My name's Lizzie. We are reading more from my Reminisce book, Life in America. This is actually a magazine, and sometimes they make a special edition for their subscribers. And my grandparents were subscribed to this magazine for years. My grandma recently just passed away. She gave me this book a long time ago. And in honor of her, since this was probably the prime of her life, we're talking anywhere from the 20s to the 70s. History in America, what it was like. I'm going to read a full chapter, so let's get right into it. We're starting with We Can Do It. Looks like ingenious ways of kids making money. That's what it looks like, but we'll get into it and see what happens. The never give up attitude, it's a part of our nation's character. No matter how difficult the challenge or how daunting the task, Americans face it with a don't quit, keep on trying mentality. I had great role models when it came to overcoming adversity. These were my grandparents, says Susanna Laudel of Nashville, Tennessee. Mima and Dad experienced many hardships in their lives. Dad almost died when he contracted tetanitis after a farm accident. In 1925, their home was destroyed by a tornado. They started over and bought a hardware store, only to see it ravaged by fire several years later. The snack shop they opened next was almost robbed. Mama talked the would-be robber out of it. She cared for Dad when he suffered from dementia, and she fought to walk again after breaking her hip. They always stayed strong, looked trouble square in the eye, and found a way to go on. With stories about the Great Depression, World War II, and more, this chapter is a testament to those who with that indomitable American spirit. I love it. I love that spirit of America. Yes. Woo! Steps to make ends meet. Look at this young, handsome little couple there. Very young, starting out. Maybe that's them. We'll find out. Got some shoes. What's going on? Steps to make ends meet. Mom and Dad went the extra mile and foot to provide for a family of 10 during the Depression. Oh my goodness. Raising 8 children in a house with 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a 1 bathroom is no easy task. I cannot imagine. I grew up with 5 other siblings with 1 bathroom, and that alone was fucking hell. But that's just what my parents did during the hardships of the 1930s. Charles Spurgeon? I don't know. Charles, we're just going to call him that. Taylor and Ollie Hubbard were married in 1913 and moved into a home in Dansville, Virginia, that same year. By the time the stock market crashed and the Depression struck in 1929, they had 6 children. 2 more would be born by 1933. My father worked 5.5 days per week in a knitting mill, while my mother stayed home to take care of the children. After the economic downturn, Dad was put on a short work week. Like many people in those difficult days, we faced struggle and sacrifice. But we always managed to have food on the table thanks to my parents' thrifty ways. Having grown up on farms, Mom and Dad knew how to grow and preserve food. They put that knowledge to good use during the Depression. I don't know what our grocery bill was, but it must have been pretty low. In the backyard, we had peach, cherry, and apple trees and a vegetable garden along the banks of a small creek. Granddaddy Hubbard, who lived down the road from us, would bring his mule and plow it to get ready for the spring seed each spring. Hatching plans. Our backyard was big enough to accommodate 2 large poultry houses, too. Somehow, Dad found time to build them. To get their chicken production going, my parents invested in a poultry prodder. This enclosed contraption was equipped with light bulbs that generated enough heat to hatch a large number of eggs placed just beneath them. I can't recall how long it took for the eggs to hatch, but we kids were there to watch the little chicks break out of their shells. The brooder was kept in our bedroom. Mom canned much of our homegrown harvest for the winter months. With our little orchard, the vegetable garden, the chickens, and the eggs, we never went hungry. To save even more money, Dad took another economical step. He acquired a shoe last that he used to repair our footwear. The shoe last was an iron foot-shaped form and a heavy wood block base. Using this tool, Dad could hammer new leather or rubber soles and heels onto our old shoes, making them wearable again. To us kids, all these thrifty measures were very important for one reason. They meant we could get 5 cents a week as a candy allowance. I still have that old shoe last. It occupies a place of honor in our breakfast room, and my wife and I pass by it many times each day. Battered and well used, the shoe last is a reminder of my bygone years when people faced life's hard knocks on their own and came through all of it better for it. Aww. Yep, that is them in their older years, and those were the shoes they kept repairing. I'm sure that saved a lot of money. Shoes were, I'm sure, very expensive in the Great Depression. They're very expensive now. Through the Depression, all that fun for a dime. My father, at the right, which is this handsome gentleman right here, was always full of fun, even during the Great Depression when our lives were the hardest. One way or another, he kept life interesting for us 5 kids when we were growing up in Waterloo, Iowa. I remember several times when we had hardly 2 coins to jingle together in his much-patched pockets. He announced out of the blue that he had hidden a dime somewhere in our house. It would be in plain sight, he said. Nothing had to be lifted, opened, or looked under. We could find the dime with both hands clasped behind our backs. The hunt was on. Sometimes it took an hour or 2 of enthusiastic searching to find the dime, as visions of licorice suckers and jawbreakers danced through our heads. For the life of me, I can't remember who the lucky ones were who discovered these dimes. But I do recall with great fondness the simple games my father dreamed up to entertain us and brighten our days. Oh my God, they got excited about a dime back then? If kids were still like that. Burying the old man. In 1933, many people in our small town were struggling with the economic hardships of the time. On Memorial Day, we found a way to end the Depression symbolically at least. The holiday festivities that day in Lake Butter, Florida, included the dedication of a newly constructed bridge. As the dedication got underway, our local American Legion post led a group of beautiful girls across the bridge, followed by Boy Scouts, war veterans, and public officials. At last, spectators were invited to gather near the bridge in a little churchyard on the hill. They unpacked picnic baskets and spread their lunches as the band played Happy Days Are Here Again, a favorite tune of the time, and politicians gave speeches. My young sister and I were allowed to roam through the crowd, and we came upon what looked like a fresh grave near the church door. A crude sign read, "Old Man Depression." Only a small, wilted bouquet of yellow bitterweed flowers decorated the mound of earth. It was truly a pathetic sight. Though we were young girls, we were old enough to know we ought to be respectful of the dead. So what we saw men do as they walked by shocked us. They spat tobacco juice on the grave, kicked dirt on it, and made despairing remarks about the old man. Not only that, they seemed to enjoy their antics, slapping their suspenders and laughing. It was some years before I understood that the reason for the behavior at the grave, it was a way of saying, these hard times won't get the best of us. I understood that I should be happy to say goodbye to old man depression. And good riddance, too. That's funny. Famous float. Making a living was especially difficult during the Depression. My father, Paul Rucker, built his root beer stand in the early 1930s to supplement his income as a plumbing contractor in Minneapolis. Oh my God, St. Paul. I've talked too much today. Two of my sisters, Freda and Margaret, and my brother Herb, like H-E-R-B, are in the photo. It was taken after Prohibition had been repealed, as shown by the beer signs. One day, Herb made a drink for his girlfriend, who did the books, and put ice cream in her soda. A few days later, he did the same thing with a root beer. To this day, we're convinced Herb invented the root beer float. Maybe he did. There they are. Cute little couple. Surviving the dirty 30s took real grit. When the dark dust storms raged, life came to a standstill and streetlights turned on in the daytime. In the spring of 1935, we moved to the small town of Downs in north central Kansas. My father, George DuBois, was a well-known real estate broker, and it wasn't long before property in Kansas and the surrounding states where father did business was moving, literally. We were living in the heart of the Dust Bowl, and that April we experienced the true misery this term implied. When we first moved into our big two-story house of concrete block, Mother washed the walls and windows until the place sparkled. I polished the cabinets, railings, and doors. The frilly curtains Mother sewed created a friendly look, and the front porch, with its oversized swing, let us enjoy the fresh Kansas breezes. Afterward, we relaxed and waited for spring rains to provide needed moisture. The breezes came, but they didn't bring rain. Instead, they brought huge, gray, black clouds of dust that robbed us of our peace and tranquility. The breeze turned to howling winds as the bone-dry soil, loosely anchored to crops or other vegetation, was lifted up to blacken the sky. As far as we could see, the sky was dark. Dust found its way into every crevice of the house. Mother and I soaked bed sheets in the bathtub, wrung them out, and tackled them to the side of the doors. Tackled. I can read, I swear, where I lost my spot. Then we huddled around the radio, when it worked, trying to learn the extent of the storm. When we finally ventured out on foot to get some groceries, we discovered that life in the town was at a standstill. Father's real estate business came to a complete halt. It was so dark that the streetlights had been turned on. Our neighbors' chickens, confused about the day that had turned into night, gathered inside their coop to roost. One time during the many days of swirling dust, we looked out and were surprised to see that every bit of the landscape had been tinted red. Oklahoma, not to be left out of the picture, had sent us some of its red soil from across the miles. President Franklin Roosevelt's New Deal was no match for Mother Nature and couldn't stop the dust storms. But we were hopeful that it would eventually aid with any other problems we had. With the indomitable spirit of our fellow Kansans, we survived the Dust Bowl, dusted ourselves off, and looked toward a brighter future. My goodness, can you see that? It's like dark as night. Look at those pictures. That's crazy. I couldn't imagine. That had to be so scary. Struggle with polio meant never giving up. The fight against the feared disease took years, lots of courage, and plenty of support from loved ones. I was just a country girl working in the big city of Chicago in 1949. While apartment hunting, I was not feeling up to par. I thought I was getting the flu. It was an effort simply to keep step on the curb. My legs just didn't want to function. The next day I went to work as usual. I had a job as a secretary in a sporting goods and Sears mail order department. But I soon ended up in the infirmary. Although the doctors told me I was too ill to travel, I felt I just had to get home to my parents' farm in Berwick, Illinois. My sister Lois met me at the train and took me to a doctor in Monmouth? Interesting. He said my temperature was normal and that I didn't have polio. The next day, however, I couldn't even lift a hairbrush and had to have my legs lifted to get into the car and go back to the doctor. Dreaded diagnosis. This time, the doctor ordered a spinal tap. A positive report sent me to St. Mary's Hospital in Galesburg, where an X-ray room had been converted into an isolation ward for polio victims. By the time I arrived, I could no longer move my legs and had only limited movement above the waist. A raging illness obliterated my mind for the next few days, and I was listed as gravely ill. An iron lung was kept outside my hospital room, but a young nun I'll never forget, Sister Regina, stayed by my side and reminded me to breathe. The crisis passed. For the next 8.5 months, I underwent therapy at Methodist Hospital in Perora. Oh, how good Sister Kenny's hot packs and whirlpool treatments felt on my stiff, sore body. Later, I was lifted with braces, then went through more therapy to learn how to walk while wearing 16 pounds of steel and leather. I wore the braces for 9 years, until 10 operations helped me to get rid of them. I married my fiancé, Paul Perrone, a year after I got out of the hospital. He had stood by me during all those months of rehabilitation. Paul and I went on to have 34 wonderful years together and 3 beautiful children. Oh, look at that. So there she is in the tub trying to rehab. Look at those early prosthetics that had to be hard. And look at those levers. He's there supporting her. What a good guy. They just don't make them like that no more. Like a scene from a movie. The Hall family traveled to California in a homemade camper in 1946. The author is on the left in the family portrait taken a few years earlier, and under the window in the photo at the far right. So this is the family up here. Let's see what they're about. Anyone who has seen The Grapes of Wrath has an idea what my family was like when we left home in search of a better life. In the movie, members of a poor farm family pack up their belongings in an old, overloaded truck and leave Oklahoma for the promise of work in California. We sure weren't much different. Our vehicle was a little better and we had some money. But like the characters in the film, we had a dream about living well in the land of milk and honey. In 1946, my father, Clarence Hall, heard from his sisters that jobs in the shipyards near San Diego were plentiful. Dad, who farmed during World War II, decided we should leave our home near Crawford, Oklahoma, and head west. Mom and Dad had 4 young children at the time. I was about 5 years old, and the oldest of my 3 sisters was about 7. Getting to California would be no easy feat. Dad was a good farm mechanic and blacksmith, and he had a 1934 Chevy that was in fairly good condition. He made up his mind to transform the car into a camper. Dad had no electric drills or power tools. I remember him tearing into that car with a hacksaw and a chisel. He did away with the doors, lengthened the frame, and added a drag axle, created from the front axle of an old Pontiac. The camper had masonite siding and a roof made from sheets of aluminum. It couldn't have been more than 25 feet long and 8 feet wide. We packed our clothes in boxes and loaded into the camper. When we left Oklahoma in the autumn of 1946, we headed for Amarillo, Texas, and turned onto Route 66. On the road, the camper had very few comforts or extras. We kids slept on cots on the floor and had no seats. We sat on either the floor or the bed that Mom and Dad shared. Mom cooked in a kitchen consisting of a 3-burner kerosene stove with an oven that she had to put over a burner. A little 1-burner kerosene stove provided our heat. On the way, we took just enough of the detour so that we could see the Grand Canyon. Mom wasn't enthused. She was scared of heights and was always afraid something bad would happen to us kids. She just knew one of us was going to tumble down the canyon. Disappointing destination. After crossing from Arizona into California, we wound up in Merida. But by the time we arrived, the jobs Dad was qualified for were taken. He had to settle for gathering eggs at a chicken farm. Just as in the movie, California wasn't at all what it was cracked up to be. We spent Christmas in Merida. Reminds me of Brave. Mom was expecting another baby and wanted to return to Oklahoma. Disappointed with the shortage of work in California, Dad didn't need much convincing. So later that winter, our family left for home. I vividly recall one day in particular during our return trip. In the mountainous area near Ottoman, Arizona, our camper began to jump out of gear. We were on some of the steepest hairpin curves of Route 66. Mom, who was 7 months pregnant, had to sit in a makeshift seat with no back and hold the old transmission in gear. When she relaxed too much, it would jump out of low gear, and Dad had to start all over again. We finally decided to call it quits that day and made camp for the night so Dad could work on the transmission. It was unbearably cold on that side of the mountain, and a howling wind was shaking our camper. We had just gotten into bed when we heard a strange banging noise outside. Mom got scared and was convinced wild animals were going to claw their way inside the camper and devour my sisters and me. Dad went outside to check things out and came back in laughing his head off. He told us little mountain burros were clustered around the camper, trying to get a break from the wind and escape the cold. We pushed on from there and made it back to Oklahoma in time for my brother Wayne to be born on February 15th, 1947. Wow, what a trip. The long, hot summer of 1948. Hoeing was just the beginning of the work to be done during the unforgettable season. What kind of story is this? Just kidding. Farm hoeing. Get your minds out of the gutter. Myself included. Having lived through the Great Depression and World War II as a young child, I had experienced a hard scrabble life before I was old enough to know it. Our farm family faced many hardships during my childhood, but I'll always be proud of the ways we made it through together. One particular summer stands out in my memory, the summer of 1948. I was barely 14 and had just finished the 8th grade. During the previous year, there had been little rain, and the crops on our farm in Hicks, Oklahoma, were not doing well. My parents, Robert and Hattie Morton, were getting on in years, and with only the youngest 2 of 10 children still at home, they had too much of the work for themselves. Unbeknownst to my little brother Dwayne and me, my parents had made a decision. Mama would find a job in town while Papa stayed on the farm. Mama got a job as a dishwasher during the week. When the school year ended in 1948, I started washing dishes for a few hours every Saturday to earn some extra money. But mostly I stayed home to give Papa much-needed help with the farm work. That summer was the first time in decades that my mother wasn't in the field hoeing. Now it was just Papa and me in the hot cornfield, hoeing what seemed like an endless number of rows covered with a jillion weeds. I vividly recall one boiling hot afternoon. There was no breeze for relief, and we moved slowly down the rows in oppressive heat. Just as we turned to make another round, Papa said, "Sister, I think we need to go to the house." When we reached the porch, the thermometer read 117 degrees. Holy moly. Reaping the harvest, new chapter. The real test came when the tomatoes ripened. Mama said she'd pay me 10 cents a quart to can them. I soon learned what kind of work was in store for me. I gathered the dusty spiderweb covered jars from the smokehouse and drew tons of water from the well to rinse off the dirt. I drew more water to heat and wash the jars with lye soap, then drew more for rinsing. My arms ached, but I was finally ready. Toting a 10-gallon feed can, I hiked to the tomato patch. It looked solid red. Ripe tomatoes were everywhere. I couldn't believe how many there were. I struggled up the hill to the house with the filled can. After drawing more water to wash the tomatoes, I peeled, cut, and cooked them the way Mama had instructed. When the tomatoes were ready, I filled each scalded jar and placed salt on top. The rubber on the caps had softened in the hot water, which made for tight seals when I screwed on the caps and rings. After canning all the tomatoes I gathered, I started the process over again. I usually did 2 batches per day. That summer, I canned 40 quarts. When my mother saw the fruits of my labor, she praised my efforts and paid me what she promised, $4. I was so proud. I've never forgotten the summer of 1948. Only after I became an adult did I realize how much my parents had struggled and how proud they were of me for helping. Our lives were harder than I'd realized at the time. Yet I believe I did what any farm girl would have done. It gives me great satisfaction to know I helped my parents when they needed it most. Oh, there she is right there as a young lady. What a good helper. On the home front, through a child's eyes. I was 6 when Pearl Harbor was bombed on December 7th, 1941. From that day of infamy until the end of the war, I witnessed the sacrifices and the indomitable spirit of the folks at home. Official national rationings, including the big ones, gasoline and meat, affected everyone. Gas wasn't a problem for my family because we didn't have a car until 1949. But those little red tokens for meat, there was never enough. Seemingly everywhere I looked in my town of Medford, Massachusetts, I saw someone in a military uniform. Being an imaginative boy, I too wanted to wear a soldier's outfit. Thanks to a wealthy grandmother, I did get one. And everywhere I looked, I saw a V for victory. There were victory bikes, victory stamps, and war bonds. In school, I'd buy the stamps, lick them, and put them in my stamp book. My family kept a victory garden, too. One day, I was sent to my room for eating radishes right from the ground. Shortly afterward, my mother called for me. With moist eyes, she told me President Roosevelt had died. I was the only one she had that afternoon for support. I was constantly involved with collections of paper, rubber, any item that could be sold so the money could be donated for the war effort. We even collected drippings from our bacon when we could afford it. In a food drive at the movie theater, we could receive a ticket for a can of food. At the time, a ticket was 10 cents. A can of peaches or Spam cost more, but donating food felt good. In August of 1945, my family listened to President Truman speak about the bombing of Hiroshima. Germany had already surrendered, and in a matter of weeks the war would be over. I've never forgotten my childhood experiences from 1941 to 1945. As I look back now, I recall those years as the best of my youth, in no small part because I saw the best in all of us. That's beautiful. That's his stamp book. He sent in a picture of it. Jugs for the birds. During World War II, city friends of my parents asked Dad if they could paint victory gardens on our farm near Rockford, Illinois. Dad left 1.5 acres unplanted, and 9 friends divided up the land into plots. Most of the gardens looked very nice and did well that year. One gardener, however, had a problem. His plot was located close to the fence line and the trees, and he had trouble with birds continuously pecking at the ripening crops. That winter, he discussed his nuisance while at the office. His co-worker jokingly suggested trying woohoo jugs. He said that if glass bottles were placed next to the rows, the wind blowing across the open necks would create a woohoo noise and scare the birds away. The next summer, 6 5-gallon jugs were placed strategically in the garden along the fence line. I don't know if many birds were scared away, but the birds had made nests next to 2 of the jugs raised a fine bunch of youngsters. Oh no, so it backfired. They made a house in it. Oh dear. Oh, this is one of the last stories of this chapter. Building a newspaper from the mud up. A half-buried press made headlines for his family twice. When a hurricane raced toward the Texas coast in 1919, the small community of Taft was in the direct path of the storm. Winds exceeded 100 miles per hour, and tides that rose 16 feet above normal devastated the area. Oh my God, that's a big hurricane. Hurricane force winds picked up the huge Cranston printing press from the building that housed the town newspaper. Oh my God. First of all, I worked in printing. These machines are tons, massively heavy. Holy shit, for it to move that. The 2-ton machine was carried away and hurled into a cotton patch where it sunk into the muddy earth. Before the storm, the sisters who owned the newspaper were on the brink of discontinuing publication. The paper had been limping along because there were few businesses in the area and the local cowpokes were not avid readers. Thinking the press had disintegrated in the storm, the sisters were downright slack-jawed when a farmer came into town and reported the Cranstons' whereabouts. When they saw the machine embedded in the ground 2 miles from town, they walked away, leaving it to rest in peace. The Texas Ranch Review was never re-established. Out of the mud. 2 years later, my father, Henry Richards, was a young printer searching for a job. While visiting some friends in Corpus Christi, he met W.S. Clark, who was interested in starting a newspaper in Taft. Dad agreed to join Mr. Clark in his venture, but first they needed to find a location and buy equipment. Folks around Taft told them about a printing press they could have for free if they were willing to retrieve it. This sounded too good to be true, but Dad and Mr. Clark followed directions and found the rusty machine sticking out of the mud. The situation was almost laughable. Even if the press could be dredged up, how could it possibly be restored to running condition? But Dad never shied away from a challenge, and Mr. Clark was just as determined. They rented a building in town to house the mud-clotted giant and gathered a few workers, plus mules, crowbars, shovels, 2x4s, and somehow they managed to exhume the press from its resting place. After the crew completely dismantled the press, they rebuilt it from the ground up. The bed, the ink trays, the gears, the rods, the nuts and bolts were laid on the cement floor, and each piece was cleaned and oiled. Only the rubber ink rollers had to be replaced. The shiny, good-as-new printing press was born again and christened the Big Black Bertha. On May 5th, 1921, also Dad's 29th birthday, the first issue of the Taft Tribune was printed and distributed. With Mr. Clark, Dad gave the business his best effort, but in the end, the town still proved too small to support a newspaper. The Taft Tribune was discontinued, and Dad moved on to work at other printing companies in the region. Back to Bertha. Dad married my mother, Ida Davis, in 1828, and they established a print shop in Woodsboro, where they published the town's newspaper. Our family resided in the small living quarters in the back of the building. In 1942, 2 decades after Dad left Taft, another hurricane hit the Texas coast. Woodsboro was pounded by the wind and rain. Just after midnight on August 30th, we huddled inside while the whole building shook. When the telephone operator in the brick building across the street saw a piece of our roof fly off, she called and told Dad to bring us over. I was just 10 months old at the time. Dad picked me up and guided my mom and 2 brothers to the telephone building and safety. In the light of dawn, Mom and Dad stepped through the rubble that used to be their home and livelihood. There was little to salvage, and they decided to start fresh elsewhere. While we were staying at a border house, Dad found out that an established newspaper in a nearby town was for sale due to the owner's declining health. The newspaper was, you guessed it, the Taft Tribune. Dad obtained a small loan to Latch the Richards Printing Company. From 1942 to 1950, the Richards family printed the Taft Tribune on a cast-iron printing press named Big Black Bertha, the very one Dad had rescued from a cotton field 20 years earlier. Wow, it's funny how things come back around. The last story in this chapter is Doing Their Part. Lenora Ross and her 8-year-old daughter proved a patriotic pair as they sold war stamps in a booth in Livingston, Idaho during World War II. My mother wanted us to look our best and made us matching outfits, remembers Jeanette Ross Wilbur of Boise, Idaho. They were inspired by a Ladies' Home Journal magazine cover from 1942. I still have the cute little jumper I was wearing in this photo, which was published in our newspaper, the Livingston Tribune. Oh, so there are matching outfits selling war stamps. Super cute. I love hearing about history. I hope you're liking it. Please give this a like if you want more in the future, or I'll probably do more readings. I'm going to try to space it out because I'm running out of things to read, and I can't find any of their old Reminisce magazines. I might actually subscribe to it just to have it for myself, because even the regular magazines have, this is like what's in a regular magazine. They just pick really good ones and put them in here. They always have stories about history in it, so if you like history like me, I would suggest getting a membership to the Reminisce magazine. They ship it right to your house. I like it. I enjoyed it, and it's a good memory of my grandparents, because my grandpa read them first. He passed away. My grandma kept his subscription all the way until she died like a month or two ago. So that's a long time. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you all next time. Bye, guys.